The introduction of charter schools has puzzled many people. It came as a surprise to many of us after the general election in 2011 that charter schools had, it seemed, already been an agreement between the ACT and the National Party. Charter schools don't arise out of nowhere, and really at one level they should not have caught us by surprise in November of last year. Government have been working on this for a number of years. The Step Change group, Hekia Parata, Heather Roy, Roger Douglas, had been working on the ways in which we could change the nature of public education over a number of years. What it simply means is that publicly funded schools will be run by private sponsors. It is a significant change in the way in which education is funded, managed and operated within the New Zealand context. Charter schools are part of an ideological drive to dismantle quality public education. It's part of a wider jigsaw puzzle which includes the introduction of national standards, national league tables, charter schools, and no doubt a voucher school system as well. So another part of that puzzle is the way in which charter schools also bring about the de-unionising of the teacher workforce. And the way in which that's done is around the legislative changes required, which will see the individual contracting of teaching, and teachers will be able to be employed on those individual contracts. And that immediately is around de-unionising the workforce. For the Prime Minister, that's around introducing the flexibility of the private system into the state system. Documents of the Working Party make it quite clear that changes to introduce charter schools cannot be done under the Private Schools Act. It would suggest to me that part of the problem that they're going to face in the introduction of charter schools is making significant change now to provide the kind of flexibility that the government wants, and that flexibility is all about de-unionising the teacher workforce. We only have to look back over the last couple of weeks to look at the kind of fuss unions can make and the importance of the fuss unions can make in protecting quality public education. It's not the kind of fuss this government wants teachers to be able to make. The parallel strategy is that government subsidies for private schools have increased from $40 million when National took office to over $70 million today. In 2010, the increase was 22.3%, with similar annual increases since. And although the market is allowed to triumph, obviously not when it involves our mates, Wanganui Collegiate this year is the beneficiary of over $3 million to support a failing private school. At the same time, the government is seeking to cut over $43 million in the education budget. There are a whole range of simplistic and misleading manipulations of statistics. The notion of 1 in 5 students leaving schools with poor levels of literacy and numeracy is a fallacy.
Up to 1 in 5 children leave our schools without the literacy and numeracy skills they need to succeed.
The fallacy is based on using NCEA statistics and saying the failure rate at NCEA is around basic literacy and numeracy, and that's completely inaccurate. NCEA Level 2 does not test basic literacy and numeracy, but it's one manipulation which is used constantly to generate a sense of crisis, requiring a radical solution. People wonder about why would business be interested in education, and the reality, of course, is that there is big money in education. Rupert Murdoch understands that there is a potential $500 billion business simply in the American education market. And although the figures obviously aren't that large in New Zealand, there is significant opportunity for business to make money in education. Obviously for someone like Catherine Isaac, that private companies only have, or private interests only have 4% of the current market is of concern to her. The state has far too much ownership of the current model, and what they're really interested in is growing private share of the public purse. Julian Robertson, who is a hedge fund operator and a well-known American philanthropist with strong connections to New Zealand, has been a heavy investor in the KIPP schools. Julian's son Spencer runs this charter school in New York. The opportunity to make money out of charter schools is incredibly enticing. However, the evidence that charter schools make a difference to learning, according to the Massey Reference Group report, at best is inconclusive, and the evidence for the success of charter schools in solving the problems outlined by proponents is meagre. One of the most frequently cited reports is the Stanford report, which has been used by both opponents and proponents of charter schools to justify their position. What the research says is that 17% of charter schools do better, and 56% are about the same, and 37% are worse. And that's a study across the whole of the United States. In Sweden, free schools have become big business. 20% of students are now funded in free schools. The Massey report suggests, however, that public schools in Sweden have become tradable commodities, caught up in a global battle for supremacy among transnational corporations and private equity funds. If we look at the PISA ranking system, one needs to ask the question, why would we be interested in New Zealand in taking on board the experiment of countries who are doing worse than us in international league tables? Let's have a look though, because the model that this government is particularly interested in is the KIPP model. Its relationship to Julian Robertson is one that we are unsure of. But what we do know is that charter schools in the United States enroll smaller proportions of students whose English is limited and students with disabilities. The students who are hardest to educate are left to public schools. What we do know is that they have very high attrition rates. In some schools, between 50 and 60% of students who enroll drop out. This is not a model for public education, which is about educating all children. If you look at the way in which the KIPP model runs in the United States, what we see is a kind of education boot camp. Strict orderly environment, regular testing, a limited variety of pedagogical methods, long school days up to 8-9 hours a day, 6 days a week, very unconventional recruitment of teachers, complete autonomy over regard to curriculum and employment. John Key has been a very strong proponent of the boot camp approach to working with young people, and quite clearly he sees that the boot camp methodology can replace the kind of ways in which we've worked with young people, and that charter schools are a way of bringing that kind of boot camp mentality into the education sector. In terms of money, when we look at KIPP schools, they receive on average $18,491 per pupil versus $11,991 per student in a public school. However, they spend only an extra $457 per student. So when we wonder where you can make the money in charter schools, it's that differential which provides the opportunity for private companies to make money out of poor children in the most impoverished parts of our country. If you look at the recent English experience with the establishment of academies, the evidence is suggesting that although there may be some educational gains for some, it is often at the cost of greater social segregation and the exclusion of less able students, and that the dominant special character of those schools tends to be one of business entrepreneurship. Overall, the English experience demonstrates a consistent pattern of reinforcing existing educational inequality and reducing choice for the already disadvantaged students and families they are supposed to help. So what we see is that the rhetoric of introducing charter schools to increase the life chance of the most disadvantaged is not borne out by the evidence of how charter schools have operated in other jurisdictions. All the debate around charter schools for the government is around the failure of schools and teachers rather than the failure of economic policy, which has caused the disintegration of an equitable society in New Zealand. What we know is that Māori are 2.5 times more likely to be in the most deprived group than New Zealand Pākehā, and Pacifica are 3.5 times more likely to be in that same group. We know that the top 1% of this country have a net worth ownership of 16.4%, that the top 10% have over half the wealth of this country, and that the bottom 50% have a net worth ownership of just over 5%. So when we are talking about wanting to make a difference in education, it's not about private models of ownership. It must surely be about addressing the growth in social inequity. We know that at least 1 in 5 children live in severe or significant hardship, and at least 1 in 4 children live below the semi-official poverty line. These are the real statistics that drive educational unachievement in this country, and they will not be fixed by neoliberal assaults on quality public education. Opponents of charter schools are presented as dinosaurs by governments. They are seen as making an excuse for low expectations and bad teachers. My opposition to charter schools is not about saying that we have everything right in education. Clearly we need to be working to improve an existing system rather than handing our system over piece by piece for the market somehow to miraculously fix it.